President Xi's days are numbered. I'm your host, Steve Metre, and thanks for joining me today. We're witnessing the end of an empire, as what's going on with China right now will change the way the world views China and does business with them. Let's over to Bloomberg. Now, I want to pick this story up, but I want you to frame this as how the Western world is viewing what's going on there, because it's going to have major long-term ramifications in terms of who's doing business there and why. China's COVID unrest boils over as citizens defy lockdown efforts after an online video of fire in an apartment block unleashes nationwide anger and protest over restrictions. It began with a video on social media of a woman screaming in a burning building, an image that frightened people across China who have been facing rolling quarantines and lockdowns that can cause their apartment blocks to be closed or blocked off by steel gates. Now imagine this is something we don't see that happens in America. So again, we're framing this as how we see what's going on there, and it's horrible. This is no way to treat people, and if you're doing business there, you're thinking that, is that potentially one of the employees of a contract company that I'm hired? Is that one of them that's stuck there? Is that the kind of business I want to be involved in? Or do I want to take my business perhaps elsewhere? As more videos appeared online showing residents forcing officials to back down, protesters took to the streets in a public outpouring of anger and frustration, even calling for President Xi Jinping to step down, a level of national dissent unheard of since Xi took power a decade ago. And now this is a big transition here, because we're seeing the public start to say, hey, you know what? Your policies aren't working. We don't like them. We don't want to live this way. We understand that we do live in a dictatorship, but now you're starting to go too far. And we're going to start to be nice at first. You have an opportunity here to step down, because what happens if he chooses eventually not to and political unrest continues to rise? Well, now it gets even uglier. I think you could say this is the most confrontational street event since Tiananmen, based on viewing of the video footage from Shanghai. And again, this is not good. This is potentially setting off a chain reaction that not only China doesn't want to see happen, but the Western world is going to have a serious problem with. It's going to have to make serious changes to deal with this, because they don't want to be caught in the middle of this. And a lot of American companies are going to. Step down, the crowd chanted. Xi Jinping, shouted the man. Step down, the crowd echoed, because the thing about dictators and throughout history is they tend not to have long life expectancies when political or economic unrest begin. And if they don't listen to what the crowds are saying, well, eventually the crowds show up at their front door and continue to pound on it until it comes down. But you can bet a man like President Xi is not going to back down. I think a crackdown is predictable. I think that will happen. The determination that a man like Xi Jinping has to fight back is ironclad. He'll go to the mat, and he may win in the short term, but he'll end up losing in the long term, because internally he's creating a huge problem, and the global economy is also adding to that. And when you look at the corporate pressure that's going to be faced here, at least from a humanitarian and a political standpoint, a lot of Americans are going to start demanding those goods not be made in China. But President Xi's got a huge problem, because what does he need to happen here? He needs all these people to get to work, and he needs houses for them to live in. That's the first two important things of any dictator, because if they don't have anywhere to live, and they don't have a job, and they don't have anything to eat, well, again, they'll show up on his front door, and his exit will not be one that he likes. China's youth jobless rate hits record 20% in July on COVID woes, but it continued to climb. Also represents a growing concern for policymakers, see President Xi Jinping here, given that jobs figures are gaining increasing attention as top leaders downplay the country's gross domestic product growth target. It's also a threat to the kind of stability that the ruling Communist Party wants in the run-up of a major Congress later this year. and that's expected to give President Xi a president-defined third term in power. And again, that's not what they want. You don't want a lot of people unemployed because, again, if they have nothing else better to do because they have no prospects for jobs, no way to feed their families, nowhere to live, again, they'll look to the leadership and they'll know there's one man keeping them from what they want, and his reign will come to an end. About 11.58 million students from universities and colleges are expected to graduate in 2023, and this will only make the problem worse, as 0.82 million more than this year's total, according to the Ministry of Education. And these details came from a joint conference on graduate employment held with the Ministry of Human Resources and Social Security, because this is a major issue, is what are we going to do with all these young people who we probably told that if you go to school and get an education, you'll have a job. And now, due to the policies of President Xi and a slow glowing economy, your prospects for work are fairly low. Your ability to feed yourself also very low, and your ability to get a house, well, we've talked about that and how bad the housing market is there, and it's probably not going to get any better, even though the government is running to try to salvage it. Chinese banks, $178 billion in medicine for developers won't cure all ills. The fresh commitments from state-owned banks, coupled with a recent expansion of a government-sponsored bond guarantee program, are designed to help developers remain in business and finish construction on their projects. The actions would help resolve real estate companies' near-term liquidity pressures, but much bigger challenge is regaining the trust of the ordinary Chinese citizen. Now, we said that this needed to happen, that the banks needed to provide money to the developers to finish these properties, because as you recall, people in China buy properties and begin paying on them before they're done being built. And of course, the developers were all going broke, had no money, and now the government eventually got around to the fact that, hey, we're going to bail you out through the banks. Smart move. They're going to create loans for you, and they're also going to help with your bond issuance, because they need to restore confidence in the housing market, because where's their jobs at? You got it, a whole bunch of jobs in that housing market. Now, if this doesn't turn around, what you're going to see is a cascading chain of events, because Western world executives are going to look over at China and say, hey, you know what? Not only are their policies and the way they treat people bad for business and puts pressure on us, but doing business there is pretty difficult, because if our factories aren't open, if our people can't get there and build products that we need, if we can't ship them through the country because they're protesting, well, then we don't have a business. And what you'll see is American companies start to look elsewhere and get out of China, and that will only make things even worse for President Xi. As Apple's reliance on China grows perilous with chaos in iPhone City, as a recent escalation at one of Foxconn's manufacturing facilities show how grim conditions have become under their COVID-0 policy. Taiwan's Foxconn, Apple's main manufacturing partner, operates iPhone City independently. It has acknowledged it has made mistakes in managing employees while blaming local officials for unpredictable policies that made meal delivery and maintenance almost impossible. And of course, government authorities, they didn't want to respond. But again, this is the kind of news that an executive in the U.S. doesn't want to hear about. Not only do they not want to hear that their factory isn't running at capacity, they don't want to hear that people are being mistreated, because again, there becomes a lot of consumer and political backlash with that. And without a surprise, what we're seeing Apple do, I think a lot of other companies are going to start following suit. As Apple begins making the iPhone 14 in India, marking a big shift in its manufacturing strategy. Apple's focus on manufacturing in India highlights the tech giant's desire to diversify production away from China and boost customers in India, which remains a rather small market for the company. And again, I think this is going to be the beginning of what you're going to see as a larger shift out of China, because again, if you start to get a chain reaction going on here, that the government is going to get overthrown and the people are very unhappy, from a business perspective, this is bad news. And if you think a new dictator steps in and turns things around tomorrow, not going to happen. And that's why you're going to see more companies leave, which is going to lead to more unemployment and more political pressure. And again, the likeliness that China's end is coming along with President Xi's reign, well, in my book, it looks pretty high. I'm Steve Van Metre. Thanks for watching. Thanks for being fans. Bye now.